being the environment critic, this is about the nicest environment I've been in for a long time. And I appreciate that. I really appreciate all of you being here. This is a big job that you've set us on, this Reform Party idea that was hatched a few years ago. And we need support, both moral and otherwise, and I just really appreciate the effort that Gordon and his people have put through, the Constituency Association, and certainly for Preston. Today was the first time I've been able to travel with Preston, and I'll tell you, I don't know how he does it. If I tried to keep up with him, I don't know, I'd fade away into a shadow. But anyway, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Preston Manning, the leader of the Reform Party and the leader of Her Majesty's official opposition. In caucus, I've worked closely with Preston. I have grown to appreciate the man, his work ethic, and all his other ethics. He is a tremendous person. He has a vision, or a vision for Canada, as he would say, that we need. And we need it very badly, and we have to keep our shoulders to the wheel and keep marching, as Stan used to say, to get that done. He has more integrity and more wisdom than any other political leader in this country. And when you can sit in the House of Commons and watch him deliver a speech, do some questions and answers, and there isn't anybody, and I mean anybody, in that House that can hold a candle to him. And we appreciate that from him very much. He balances his political life with his family life very well. He's very devoted to his family. His wife is taking care of the grandkids, and as Preston's been saying, they have preference or priority over everything, and I know that because I have a couple myself. But hopefully tonight, not hopefully, Preston will tonight share some of his thoughts on the much talked about, from all angles, United Alternative. He's going to give a historic view on Canada and how important Western Canadians are to this new principled government that we want to form. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Preston Manning.
Well, I too would just like to begin by saying a sincere thank you to, first of all, to each and every one of you for being here tonight. We know that you're busy people and that you've got lots of other things you could be doing, and I appreciate and Rick appreciates you spending some time with us tonight, and also the financial support that your presence represents. I also want to just take the opportunity to pay tribute to Rick. Rick is one of the hardest working members of our caucus. He had some pretty big shoes to fill in Ray Speaker's shoes here, but he's doing an excellent job for us, and more importantly for you, in representing the interests of your constituency. As you know, Rick is the chief environmental critic for the official opposition. That's becoming an increasingly important portfolio. He's done a lot of work for us on this Endangered Species Act, which I think is of concern to many of you. I think Rick has proposed that perhaps the Canadian farmer should be listed as an endangered species, and if he got the protection, that might be the. But it really is just a privilege for me to be here and to have a chance to tell you how much Rick means to us. We just thank you for sending him to our caucus and sending him to Ottawa. What I'd like to talk on briefly, and then I'd like to get to a question and answer period, is I'd like to talk to you about the Old West, I'd like to talk to you about the New West, and I'd like to talk to you about the Canada of the 21st century. Now, Sandra and I had a special reminder of the importance of the Old West and the spirit of the Old West this summer when we went on this 125th anniversary ride of the RCMP. And I know that many of you followed that trek. This was, of course, a reenactment of the original 275 men and officers, the RCMP, that left Fort Dufferin in southern Manitoba and came after many hardships and all sorts of obstacles to Fort Whoop up in Alberta, and this ride was the commemoration of it. And we just had a great time. The portion that we took on was we went from Foremost to down towards the Milk River and to Writing and Stone Park. And of course, that's one of the most beautiful parts of the country. Milk River particularly is in the center of the old Blackfoot Empire, and when you see how big it was, all the way from the Livingston Mountains to the Cypress Hills, all the way from the Battle River in the north to south of the Missouri, that's a pretty magnificent piece of the country. And it got us thinking about the spirit of the Old West, what those people overcame to achieve and allow us to enjoy what we enjoy today. The only thing they told us we had to watch was Sheila Copps was going to be on the ride, and that there were rattlesnakes in the Milk River area, with Sheila being the more dangerous than the than the snake. But Sheila fell off her horse in Manitoba, so we didn't actually run into her, and we enjoyed the whole trip. Now, we always get, sometimes I go to that Niagara country in Ontario, and there's a bunch of reformers there that have always been trying to persuade me to get Sheila Copps to go over that Niagara Falls in a barrel. They say it would give new meaning to the Maid of the Mist. But anyway, I should get off onto Sheila. As much as we admire the Old West and the pioneering spirit it had, one of the great frustrations of the Old West at the turn of the last century was the frustration that the West never had enough clout to implement its ideas to affect national policy. At the turn of the last century, the West had less than 10% of the population of the country. It produced less than 10% of the GNP, the wealth of the country, and it had less than 10% of the seats in the parliament. And although the West was the pioneering area, the West wanted to do all sorts of things. It had a Dickens of a time being able to even get its concerns on the national agenda, let alone influencing them. I sometimes think that experience the West went through gave us a kind of an underdog attitude, an underdog psychology. Maybe a feeling that we can never win, that we could never influence the national agenda, that we could never go to something national and actually have our view prevail. And if there's still people that feel that, I think one of the things that I'd like to do is to share some good news with Westerners. And that is, in the 21st century, the West, the new West, is going to have an influence like it's never had before. This part of the country now produces over a third of the wealth of the country. In the 21st century, it's going to have over a third of the population. British Columbia is going to be the second largest province in the country. And the West is going to have over a third of the seats in the national parliament. In other words, it will not be possible for anyone to form a national government or to implement a national policy without Western Canada having a say in it and actually agreeing with it. And I think that's a turning point for the West. It's a little bit like the change from being the adolescent to being an adult. It's coming of age within the Federation. And the key question that raises for Westerners, it's the main one I want to raise with you tonight, is what is the West going to use its new influence for? We got to think about that. The West going to be the influential region in the country in the 21st century, like Atlantic Canada was in the 19th century, like Ontario and Quebec were in the 20th century. But the question is, what are we going to use that new influence for? Some people would say we should use it to settle some old scores. And I'm not opposed to that in some respects. But I think we got to do more than that. I think the West has to put its stamp on the whole country. And the West has to offer some solutions to some of the problems that face not only Westerners, but the country as a whole. And I'd like to simply suggest to you tonight 3 goals that I think the new West should use its growing influence to achieve.